The candle wax was still dripping down Tyler's cheek when my sister Madison laughed. My 10-year-old son stood there, his face buried in what should have been his dream dinosaur birthday cake, hot wax from the trick candles burning his tender skin. The room fell silent except for Tyler's piercing scream and Madison's cruel, satisfied chuckle. 20 guests watched in horror as I rushed toward my child, my heart shattering at the sight of frosting mixed with blood on his beautiful face. This was supposed to be Tyler's perfect day. Instead, it became the moment that destroyed everything I thought I knew about family. I grabbed Tyler's trembling shoulders and pulled him upright, my hands shaking as I saw the full extent of what my sister had done. His left cheek was already turning an angry red, with small blisters forming where the melted candle wax had mixed with the bright blue frosting. Tyler's brown eyes were wide with shock and pain tears streaming down both sides of his face as he looked at me with complete confusion. "Mommy, why did Aunt Madison push me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't do anything wrong." My heart felt like it was being ripped from my chest. Tyler had been so excited about this party, talking about his dinosaur cake for weeks. He had specifically asked for the tall candles that spelled out "Happy Birthday" because he thought they looked super cool. Now those same candles had burned him. "Honey, let's get you cleaned up," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady as I guided him toward the bathroom. Behind us, I could hear the shocked murmurs of the other parents and the uncomfortable shuffling of children who didn't understand what they had just witnessed. Madison stood by the demolished cake, picking frosting off her fingers with an expression of complete indifference. She was wearing her favorite black dress, the one that made her feel powerful, and her red lipstick was perfectly intact despite the chaos she had created. At 28, Madison had always been beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way that drew people in before they realized what she was capable of. "Madison, what the hell is wrong with you?" My husband Brian demanded, his face flushed with anger. Brian was normally the calm one in our family, the peacemaker who could diffuse any situation. But seeing his son hurt had awakened something fierce in him. Madison shrugged a small smile, playing at the corners of her mouth. "It was just a prank, Brian. Tyler needs to toughen up anyway. He's way too sensitive for a boy his age." In the bathroom, I carefully dabbed Tyler's face with a wet washcloth, my stomach churning as I saw the true damage. The wax had created small chemical burns where it had mixed with the cake's artificial coloring. Tyler winced with every gentle touch, and I could see that this was going to need medical attention. "Mrs. Thompson, is Tyler okay?" asked Sarah Martinez, one of the mothers from Tyler's baseball team. She had followed us to the bathroom, her own 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, clinging to her side. "I think we need to take him to urgent care." I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "These burns look pretty serious." Sarah's expression darkened. "Annalie, I've never seen anything like what your sister just did. That wasn't a prank. That was assault." Her words hit me like a physical blow because I knew she was right. This wasn't typical sibling teasing or even a prank gone wrong. Madison had deliberately grabbed Tyler's head with both hands and forced his face down into the lit candles with enough pressure to ensure the wax would burn him. By the time we returned to the living room, most of the guests were already gathering their children and making polite excuses to leave. I watched helplessly as Tyler's birthday party dissolved into an awkward exodus of uncomfortable families. The kids who had been so excited to celebrate with Tyler were now confused and scared their parents, ushering them toward the door with apologetic looks. "I'm so sorry this happened, Annalie," whispered Jennifer Walsh, Tyler's teacher, as she collected her twin boys. "If you need anything, please call me." Madison was still standing by the ruined cake, but now she was actively discouraging the remaining guests from staying. "Annalie always overreacts to everything," she was telling the Henderson family. "Tyler barely got touched. She just likes to create drama." I felt like I was watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. Not only had Madison hurt my son, but now she was manipulating the situation to make me look like the unreasonable one. And incredibly, some people seemed to be buying it. Tyler pressed close to my side, still trembling. "Mom, can we go to the hospital now?" My face really hurts. Looking down at my brave little boy trying so hard not to cry in front of everyone, I made a decision that would change everything. We were going to get Tyler the medical care he needed, and then I was going to make sure Madison faced consequences for what she had done. The urgent care center was nearly empty on this Saturday afternoon, which meant we were seen quickly. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a kind woman in her 50s, with graying hair and gentle hands, examined Tyler's injuries with growing concern. "How did this happen?" she asked me privately while Tyler played with toy dinosaurs in the examination room. My sister shoved his face into his birthday cake while the candles were still lit. I explained the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. The wax melted and burned him. Dr. Hoffman's eyebrows raised slightly. This appears to be a second-degree chemical burn. The wax combined with the artificial food coloring has created a reaction that's more severe than a typical candle burn. We'll need to treat this carefully to prevent scarring. My stomach dropped. Scarring. Tyler could have permanent marks on his face because of what Madison had done to him. As Dr. Hoffman began applying a special ointment to Tyler's cheek, I heard familiar voices in the waiting room. Through the small window in the door, I could see Madison and our father, Robert, arriving together. Madison was gesturing dramatically, and even from a distance, I could tell she was playing the victim. "Tyler, buddy, how are you feeling?" Brian asked, sitting down next to our son and gently ruffling his dark hair. "It stings a lot, Daddy, but Dr. Hoffman says I'm being very brave." Tyler managed a small smile, which broke my heart all over again. Even after being deliberately hurt by family, he was trying to be positive. "You are incredibly brave," Dr. Hoffman assured him, "and this medicine is going to help you heal up just fine." When we finally emerged from the examination room, Madison was sitting in the waiting area like she belonged there. She had changed clothes and was now wearing a soft pink sweater that made her look innocent and concerned. Her long blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she had even removed her dramatic makeup. The transformation was calculated and disturbing. "Oh, Tyler, sweetheart," Madison exclaimed, jumping up and reaching for him. "Are you okay? I've been so worried about you." Tyler instinctively stepped behind me and I moved to block Madison's approach. "Don't touch him," I said firmly. "Annalee!" Robert's voice boomed across the waiting room. My father was a large man, 6 feet 2 inches tall with silver hair and the commanding presence of someone who had spent 30 years as a police officer. "What's gotten into you, Madison, is just trying to check on Tyler." Madison's eyes filled with crocodile tears. "Daddy, I don't understand why Annalee is being so mean to me. I already apologized for the accident at the party. I never meant for Tyler to get hurt." Accident, she was calling it an accident. "It wasn't an accident, Madison." Brian said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We all saw you grab Tyler's head and force it down into those lit candles." Madison turned to Robert with a wounded expression. "Daddy, you believe me, don't you? You know I would never hurt Tyler on purpose. I love him so much." Robert's face softened as he looked at his younger daughter. Madison had always been his favorite, and even at 28, she could still manipulate him, like a child asking for candy. "Of course I believe you, sweetheart. Annalee, you're making a mountain out of a molehill here." "A mountain out of a molehill," I repeated, incredulous. "Dad, Tyler has second-degree burns on his face." "It's barely a scratch." Robert dismissed, not even bothering to look at Tyler's bandaged cheek. "Kids get hurt all the time. You're being dramatic just like your mother always was." The casual cruelty of comparing me to my deceased mother in order to dismiss my concerns took my breath away. Mom had died when I was 16, and Robert had always blamed her for being too emotional about everything. Now he was using that same weapon against me. Madison moved closer to Tyler again, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone. "Tyler, honey, you know Aunt Madison didn't mean to hurt you, right? It was just a silly mistake. You're not really angry with me, are you?" Tyler looked up at me uncertainly, clearly confused by the gaslighting he was witnessing. At 10 years old, he didn't have the tools to understand that adults sometimes lie and manipulate, especially family members who are supposed to love and protect you. Tyler doesn't need to discuss this right now, I said firmly, picking him up despite his protests that he was too big to be carried. He needs to rest and heal. Annalee, you're being ridiculous, Robert continued. Madison made a mistake, she's sorry, and Tyler is fine. Stop poisoning that boy's mind against his family. Madison nodded emphatically. I just wanted Tyler to have fun at his party. I thought he would laugh when I pushed his face in the cake. Lots of families do that tradition. Not with lit candles, Brian pointed out coldly. Those were trick candles, Madison protested. They were supposed to be safe. But I remembered choosing those candles specifically because they burned longer and brighter than regular ones. Madison had been standing right there when I placed them on Tyler's cake that morning. She knew exactly what they were. As we left the urgent care center, I heard Robert telling Madison that she shouldn't worry about my overreaction and that everything would blow over in a few days. He promised to talk to me about being more reasonable and understanding. But as I looked at my son's bandaged face in the rearview mirror, I knew this was far from over. Madison had deliberately hurt Tyler, and now she was lying about it with our father's full support. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my family's dysfunction clearly, and it was terrifying. The confrontation happened 3 days later at Robert's house, a sprawling ranch-style home in an older neighborhood where he had lived since retiring from the police force. I had requested a family meeting because Tyler was having nightmares and kept asking why Aunt Madison had hurt him. I needed this resolved for my son's sake. Madison answered the door wearing a flowing white sundress that made her look angelic and innocent. Her hair was freshly styled, and she greeted us with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Annalee Brian Tyler, she exclaimed as if nothing had happened. I'm so glad you came. I've been hoping we could all talk and put this silly misunderstanding behind us. Tyler immediately pressed closer to Brian, clearly uncomfortable. The left side of his face was still bandaged, and Dr. Hoffman had warned us that he might have some light scarring once it healed completely. Robert emerged from the kitchen carrying a beer and wearing his favorite fishing shirt. He looked relaxed and confident, like a man who believed he was about to solve a simple problem with a little common sense. Good, he said, settling into his leather recliner. Now we can clear this whole thing up and get back to being a normal family. I sat down on the couch across from him with Brian and Tyler on either side of me. Madison chose to stand behind Robert's chair, one hand resting on his shoulder, in a gesture that clearly showed whose side she was on. Tyler has been having nightmares. I began trying to keep my voice calm and factual. He keeps asking why someone who loves him would hurt him like that. I think Madison needs to give him a real apology and explanation. Madison's face immediately crumpled into a hurt expression. Daddy, I already apologized. I don't know what else Annalee wants from me. That's right, Robert agreed. Madison has been beating herself up over this accident all week. Haven't you, sweetheart? I have, Madison said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I've barely been able to sleep knowing that Tyler got hurt because of my mistake. Brian leaned forward. Madison, what you did wasn't a mistake. You deliberately grabbed Tyler's head and forced it down into lit candles. We need you to acknowledge that so Tyler can understand what happened to him. Madison's expression flickered for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating before the innocent mask slid back into place. I would never deliberately hurt Tyler. I love that little boy like he was my own son. Tyler spoke up quietly. But you did hurt me, Aunt Madison. You pushed my face really hard and it burned. Instead of responding to Tyler with compassion, Madison's eyes flashed with irritation. Tyler, honey, you're remembering it wrong. I barely touched you. You must have leaned forward into the candles by accident. Now she was gaslighting a 10-year-old child. That's enough, I said, standing up. Madison, you're lying, and you're doing it right in front of a child you supposedly love. What kind of person does that? Robert slammed his beer down on the side table. Annalee Marie Thompson, that's my daughter you're talking to. You will not come into my house and call her a liar. Then what would you call someone who denies hurting a child when 20 people witnessed it? Brian asked. I'd call it a family misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion by someone looking for drama, Robert shot back. Anna Lee, you've always been jealous of Madison. Ever since you were kids, you've tried to make her look bad whenever you could. The accusation hit me like a slap. Growing up, I had actually spent most of my time protecting Madison from the consequences of her behavior. When she broke neighbors' windows, I had helped her cover it up. When she bullied other kids at school, I had made excuses for her. When she stole money from Mom's purse, I had even lied to protect her. Dad, I'm not jealous of Madison, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm trying to protect my son from someone who hurt him and refuses to take responsibility for it. Madison let out a theatrical sob. Why are you doing this to me, Anna Lee? All I wanted was for Tyler to have a fun birthday party. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Brian muttered. What did you just say? Robert demanded, his face turning red. I said that intent doesn't matter when a child gets hurt, Brian replied, meeting Robert's glare steadily. Madison injured Tyler, and instead of taking responsibility, she's lying about it and manipulating everyone in this room. Robert stood up, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, radiating authority and threat. Boy, you need to watch your mouth when you're talking about my family. Tyler is my family, Brian responded, also standing. And I won't let anyone hurt him, not even you. Madison stepped around Robert's chair, moving closer to Tyler with a manipulative smile. Tyler, sweetheart, you don't really think Aunt Madison hurt you on purpose, do you? You know how much I love you. Tyler looked up at her with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Yes, I do think you hurt me on purpose. You were smiling when you did it. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's mask slipped completely, and for a moment everyone in the room saw the cold fury in her eyes as she stared down at a 10-year-old boy who had dared to tell the truth about her. Robert broke the silence with a voice like thunder. Anna Lee, you've poisoned that boy's mind against his own family. You should be ashamed of yourself. I should be ashamed, I repeated, incredulous. My son is telling the truth about being assaulted by your daughter, and I should be ashamed. Madison did not assault anyone, Robert roared. She made a mistake, and you've turned it into some kind of criminal case because you've always resented her success and happiness. Success. Brian laughed bitterly. Robert Madison is 28 years old and has never held a job for more than 6 months. She lives off the money you give her and has no real relationships because she treats everyone terribly. What success are you talking about? Madison's face flushed with anger. At least I don't have to pretend to be happy with some boring suburban life and a bratty kid who cries about everything. The words hung in the air like poison. Tyler's eyes filled with tears, and I felt something fundamental break inside my chest. Madison had just called my son bratty for crying about being burned by her. Get out, I said quietly. What? Robert asked. I said get out, both of you. Stay away from my family. I picked Tyler up, no longer caring that he was getting too old to be carried. If either of you come near my son again, I'm calling the police. Robert's laugh was harsh and mocking. The police, Anna Lee, I was a cop for 30 years. You think some rookie is going to arrest my daughter for playing with her nephew at his birthday party? Madison smirked triumphantly. Daddy's right, Anna Lee. No one's going to believe your ridiculous story over ours. Everyone knows you're unstable. As we left Robert's house, I heard Madison calling after us. Don't come crying to us when you realize you've made a huge mistake. Anna Lee family is all you've got in this world. But driving away with Tyler's arms wrapped around my neck and Brian's hand squeezing mine, I realized that Madison was wrong. Family isn't about blood or obligation. Family is about people who love and protect each other. And Madison and Robert had just proven they weren't really family at all. The harassment started the very next morning. I was making Tyler's breakfast when I heard a car door slam in our driveway. Looking out the kitchen window, I saw Madison climbing out of a bright red Honda Civic that I didn't recognize, carrying 2 large suitcases and a triumphant smile. She wasn't alone. Robert was helping her unload boxes from the trunk, and they were both heading toward his house directly across the street from ours. Robert's house sat on a slight hill, which meant that from his front windows, Madison would have a perfect view of our entire property. "Brian," I called, my voice tight with anxiety, "you need to see this." My husband appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas and holding his coffee mug. When he saw what was happening across the street, his expression darkened immediately. "She's moving in with him," he said, stating the obvious, but somehow making it sound even more ominous. Tyler looked up from his cereal, following our gaze out the window. "Why is Aunt Madison at Grandpa's house so early?" I didn't know how to answer that question without frightening him, so I settled for a partial truth. "It looks like she's going to stay there for a while, honey." What I didn't say was that Madison's new living arrangement felt like a military strategy. She had positioned herself where she could watch our every move, monitor our comings and goings, and make our daily lives uncomfortable. It felt deliberate and threatening. Over the next few days, the psychological warfare began in earnest. Madison would appear on Robert's front porch whenever Tyler played in our backyard, standing there with her arms crossed and staring at us with an unnerving intensity. She started parking the red Honda directly in front of our house instead of in Robert's driveway, forcing us to walk around it whenever we left or returned home. The music started on Thursday. Madison set up speakers on Robert's front porch and played loud rap music with explicit lyrics from early morning until late evening. When Brian went over to ask her to turn it down, she sweetly explained that she was just enjoying some tunes and that noise ordinances didn't apply during daytime hours. But the most disturbing escalation happened on Friday afternoon. Tyler was playing with his toy dinosaurs on our front steps when I noticed Madison taking photos of him from across the street. She wasn't trying to hide it. In fact, she seemed to want us to see what she was doing. She used a large camera with a telephoto lens, snapping picture after picture of my son in his own yard. "Mom, why is Aunt Madison taking pictures of me?" Tyler asked, his voice small and confused. "I don't know, sweetheart." I answered honestly, but inside I was panicking. What could she possibly want with photographs of Tyler? That evening, I called the non-emergency police line to ask about our options. The officer who answered was polite, but not encouraging. "Ma'am, if she's taking pictures from a public street or from her father's property, there's not much we can do," he explained. "And playing loud music during the day isn't illegal as long as it's not excessive." "What about harassment?" I asked. "You'd need to prove a pattern of threatening behavior," he said. "Has she made any direct threats or had any physical contact with your family?" I thought about Tyler's burned face and Madison's lies about what had happened. She assaulted my son at his birthday party. "Did you file a police report at the time?" "No," I admitted. "She's my sister and I thought we could handle it as a family." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without documentation, that's going to be hard to prove after the fact." After I hung up, Brian found me sitting at our kitchen table with my head in my hands. "What did they say?" "Basically that we're on our own unless Madison does something more obviously criminal." Brian sat down across from me, his face grim. "Annalee, I found something today that you need to see." He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photos he had taken from our upstairs bedroom window. The images showed Madison walking around the perimeter of our property, testing our gate latches, trying our door handles, and peering into our windows when she thought no one was watching. "She's been doing this every day while we're at work," Brian explained. "I set up a motion-activated camera yesterday to see what she was up to." My blood ran cold. Madison wasn't just harassing us from a distance. She was actively investigating our home security and looking for ways to access our property. "We need to call the police again," I said. "I already did. They said that unless she actually enters our property or damages something walking around the neighborhood isn't illegal." I felt trapped and helpless. Madison was systematically terrorizing our family, and the authorities couldn't or wouldn't help us because she was careful to stay just within the bounds of legal behavior. That night, Tyler had another nightmare about his birthday party, but this time Madison was chasing him through the house while his face burned. He woke up screaming, and it took both Brian and me to calm him down. As I held my trembling son watching Madison's silhouette move back and forth behind the lit windows across the street, I realized that this situation was escalating beyond what our little family could handle alone. Madison wasn't going to stop until she had completely destroyed our sense of safety and security. But I had no idea that help was about to come from the most unexpected source, or that Madison's reign of terror was about to take a turn that would change everything. The phone call came at 2:15 on Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. My cell phone buzzed with a number I recognized as Tyler's elementary school, and my heart immediately started racing. Ever since Madison had moved in across the street, I lived in constant fear that something would happen to Tyler while I wasn't there to protect him. Mrs. Thompson. The voice belonged to Mrs. Garcia, the school secretary. I'm calling because we had a concerning incident today involving Tyler's pickup. My stomach dropped. What happened? Is Tyler okay? Tyler is fine, Mrs. Garcia assured me quickly. But about 20 minutes ago, a woman came to the office claiming to be Tyler's aunt. She said there was a family emergency and that she needed to pick him up immediately. Madison. It had to be Madison. Did she give you her name? I asked, already knowing the answer. She identified herself as Madison Thompson and said she was your sister. She seemed to know quite a bit about Tyler and your family situation. She even knew about his recent birthday party and the injury to his face. Of course she knew about Tyler's injury. She had caused it. Mrs. Garcia, I need you to understand something very clearly. I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. Madison Thompson is not authorized to pick up Tyler under any circumstances. She is not his emergency contact, and if she shows up again, you need to call the police immediately. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Thompson, she was very convincing. She showed us identification with the Thompson last name, and she knew Tyler's teacher's name, his birthday, even his favorite subject. If Tyler hadn't been in the bathroom at the time, you might have released my son to someone who assaulted him. I finished, my voice shaking with anger and fear. Assaulted him! Mrs. Garcia's voice rose in alarm. Mrs. Thompson, if there's a safety concern involving Tyler, we need to have that documented immediately. I closed my office door and sank into my desk chair. Madison deliberately burned Tyler's face at his birthday party 10 days ago. She's been harassing our family ever since, and now she's apparently trying to kidnap him from school. Oh my goodness, Mrs. Garcia breathed. Mrs. Thompson, you need to come in right away so we can update Tyler's safety plan and file an incident report. I was already grabbing my purse and car keys. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When I arrived at Lincoln Elementary, I found Tyler sitting in the principal's office with his teacher, Miss Foster, looking confused and slightly scared. He brightened when he saw me, but I could tell the incident had shaken him. Mommy, Mrs. Garcia said Aunt Madison came to pick me up, but you didn't tell me she was coming, Tyler said as I hugged him tightly. That's right, sweetheart. Aunt Madison was not supposed to pick you up. You should never go anywhere with someone unless Mommy or Daddy tells you it's okay first. Principal Matthews, a serious man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gestured for me to take a seat across from his desk. Mrs. Thompson, I understand we have a family situation that poses a safety risk to Tyler. I explained everything: the birthday party incident, Madison's lies and manipulation, her move across the street from our house, the harassment, and now this attempted unauthorized pickup. Principal Matthews took careful notes and asked detailed questions about Madison's appearance and behavior. The concerning thing, Principal Matthews said, is how much information she had about Tyler and our school procedures. She knew which door to use where our office was located, and she even mentioned specific details about Tyler's recent assignments. Miss Foster leaned forward. Mr. Matthews, I think I know how she got that information. Last week, someone called pretending to be Mrs. Thompson and asked several questions about Tyler's daily schedule and pickup procedures. I assumed it was a normal parent check-in, but now I'm wondering if that was actually this Madison person. My blood turned to ice. Madison had been planning this for over a week, gathering intelligence about Tyler's school routines and security procedures. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a calculated attempt to kidnap my son. "Have you called the police?" I asked. "We've filed an incident report," Principal Matthews confirmed, "and we've updated Tyler's file to indicate that only you and your husband are authorized for pickup. We've also added Madison Thompson to our restricted persons list with her photo and description." "How did you get her photo?" I asked. Mrs. Garcia looked uncomfortable. "Actually, she asked to use our bathroom before she left, and our security camera captured her image. She spent quite a bit of time in there, almost like she was stalling for time or waiting for something. Waiting for Tyler to come back from the bathroom so she could see him, I realized. She probably wanted to try to convince him to come with her willingly. The thought made me feel sick. Madison had come within minutes of potentially taking Tyler from his school, and only his absence from the classroom had prevented it from happening. As we prepared to leave, Miss Foster pulled me aside. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to tell you something else. Yesterday, Tyler seemed very distracted during class, and when I asked him what was wrong, he said that someone had been following his school bus and taking pictures of it." Following his school bus? He said he saw a red car driving behind the bus for several days in a row, and that the driver was taking pictures with a big camera. He was worried because the car looked like one he had seen at his grandfather's house. Madison had been stalking Tyler's school bus route, learning his transportation schedule, and probably figuring out the best places to intercept him. The level of planning and predatory behavior was terrifying. That evening, Brian and I sat Tyler down for a serious conversation about safety. We explained that sometimes adults don't make good choices and that even family members can be dangerous. We taught him code words to use if he ever felt unsafe and made sure he understood that he should never go anywhere with Madison, regardless of what emergency she claimed to be handling. "But why does Aunt Madison want to take me places if you don't want her to?" Tyler asked with the innocent confusion of a child trying to understand adult dysfunction. "Sometimes people do things that don't make sense, buddy," Brian explained gently. "The important thing is that you always check with mommy or daddy before going anywhere with anyone, even people you know." That night, I called my grandmother Dorothy, my mother's mother, who lived about 3 hours away in the mountains. Dorothy was 82 years old, but sharp as a tack, and she'd always been my source of wisdom and strength during difficult times. "Annalee, honey, what's wrong?" Dorothy asked immediately, hearing the stress in my voice. I told her everything: Tyler's birthday party, Madison's escalating harassment, and now the attempted school pickup. Dorothy listened without interrupting, making small sounds of concern and anger at appropriate moments. "That girl has always been trouble," Dorothy said finally. "I tried to warn your father years ago that enabling Madison's behavior would lead to something like this, but he wouldn't listen. Grandma, I don't know what to do. The police can't help us because Madison hasn't technically committed a crime they can prove, but I'm terrified that she's going to hurt Tyler or take him away from us." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. "Annalee, there are some things about Madison's past that your father never told you. Things I think you need to know if you're going to protect Tyler properly." "What kind of things?" "The kind of things that could put Madison in prison where she belongs," Dorothy said grimly. "Pack Tyler a bag and come stay with me this weekend. It's time you learned the truth about your sister." Thursday morning brought a phone call that made my worst fears about Madison seem almost quaint by comparison. Dr. Hoffman's office called at 8:30 while I was getting Tyler ready for school, and the nurse's voice was tight with concern and professional alarm. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Janet from Dr. Hoffman's office. We need you to come in today to discuss a security breach involving Tyler's medical records." "A security breach." I repeated, my hands already shaking as I helped Tyler tie his shoes. "Someone has been attempting to access Tyler's files using fraudulent authorization. Dr. Hoffman wants to meet with you in person to discuss the details and make sure Tyler's information is properly protected." I arranged for Brian to take Tyler to school and drove to Dr. Hoffman's office with a growing sense of dread. When I arrived, Dr. Hoffman's usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely controlled anger. "Annalee, what I'm about to tell you is extremely serious." She began closing her office door behind us. Yesterday afternoon, someone called our office claiming to be Tyler's legal guardian and requesting copies of his complete medical file, including his recent burn treatment records and any psychological evaluations. Legal guardian? I asked, confused. Tyler doesn't have a legal guardian other than Brian and me. That's exactly why we became suspicious. The caller identified herself as Madison Thompson and claimed that you had signed over temporary guardianship due to mental health issues. She provided Tyler's date of birth, social security number, and insurance information to verify her identity. I felt like someone had poured ice water through my veins. Madison has Tyler's social security number. Apparently so. She also had your father's insurance policy number and attempted to authorize the release using his information as Tyler's grandfather. When our staff asked for documentation proving the guardianship arrangement, she became agitated and threatened to report us to state authorities for withholding medical care from a minor. Dr. Hoffman pulled out a thick file folder and opened it on her desk. But that's not the most concerning part, Annalee. After the phone call, we discovered that someone had been researching Tyler's injuries online using our patient portal. They accessed medical databases about chemical burns, scarring patterns, and healing timelines. Someone hacked your system. Not exactly. They used legitimate login credentials that belonged to your father's former police department insurance network. Robert Thompson's credentials were used to access multiple medical databases over the past week. My father had given Madison access to his police insurance information, and she had used it to research Tyler's injuries. But why? Dr. Hoffman, what kind of information were they looking for? Based on the search history, they were specifically researching how to minimize the appearance of chemical burns and what kind of medical documentation would be required to prove the severity of Tyler's injuries. Dr. Hoffman's expression was grim. In my opinion, someone is trying to figure out how to make Tyler's burns seem less serious than they actually are. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Madison was researching Tyler's medical records so she could downplay his injuries if there was ever a legal investigation into what she had done to him. There's something else, Dr. Hoffman continued. Yesterday evening, someone called Tyler's school counselor, Ms. Peterson, claiming to be conducting a routine family welfare check. They asked detailed questions about Tyler's emotional state, whether he had mentioned any family conflicts, and if he seemed afraid of anyone in particular. Madison is trying to build a case against us, I realized. She's gathering medical and psychological information to make it look like we're the ones harming Tyler. That's what I'm afraid of, Dr. Hoffman agreed. Annalee, I've been a pediatrician for 25 years, and I've seen cases like this before. When someone starts systematically gathering a child's personal information and medical records, they're usually planning something that requires documentation or legal justification, like trying to gain custody of him, or trying to prove that his current guardians are unfit. If Madison can make Tyler's injuries seem minor, while simultaneously claiming that you're emotionally unstable and overprotective, she could potentially build a case for emergency custody removal. I thought about Madison's comments at the urgent care center calling me dramatic and claiming I was poisoning Tyler's mind against his family. I remembered her telling the school that there was a family emergency and acting like she had legitimate authority to pick up Tyler. Now I understood that these weren't random acts of harassment. They were part of a deliberate campaign to undermine my credibility and establish her own. What can we do to protect Tyler's information? I asked. Dr. Hoffman handed me a thick stack of paperwork. I'm putting a complete security lock on Tyler's medical files. Only you and Brian will be able to access any information, and we're requiring in-person identification with photo ID for any future appointments or records requests. I'm also filing a report with our security department and recommending that you contact the police about identity theft and attempted fraud. As I drove home, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Annalee. Madison's voice was sickeningly sweet. I heard you had some problems with Tyler's doctor today. That's so unfortunate. Madison, if you ever try to access Tyler's medical records again, I'll have you arrested for fraud and identity theft. Madison laughed a cold sound that made my skin crawl. Oh, sister, you're so paranoid. I was just trying to help coordinate Tyler's care, since you seem so overwhelmed by everything. Daddy and I are worried about how this whole situation is affecting your mental health. My mental health is fine. What's not fine is you stalking my family and trying to steal Tyler's personal information. Steal. Madison's voice took on a wounded tone. Annalie, I'm Tyler's aunt. I love that little boy, and I have every right to be concerned about his welfare, especially when his mother is acting so erratically and keeping him isolated from his loving family. I realized that Madison was probably recording this conversation, trying to get me to say something that could be used against me later. Madison, stay away from my son and stop contacting his medical providers. This is harassment, and I won't tolerate it anymore. You know what I think. Madison's voice turned cold and threatening. I think you're an unfit mother who's using Tyler's minor injury as an excuse to destroy this family, and I think there are people in authority who would be very interested to hear about how you're poisoning a child's mind against his relatives. The line went dead, leaving me shaking in my driveway. Madison had just threatened to report me to Child Protective Services, and she had been gathering evidence to support whatever false claims she was planning to make. When Brian came home from work, I showed him all the paperwork from Dr. Hoffman's office and told him about Madison's phone call. His face grew darker with every detail. Annalie, this has gone way beyond harassment. Madison is building a legal case against us based on fraud and stolen identity information. We need help, and we need it now. That evening, I called Dorothy again and told her about Madison's attempts to access Tyler's medical records and her implied threats about reporting us to authorities. That's it, Dorothy said, her voice sharp with anger. You pack Tyler's things right now and come here tonight. And Annalie, bring copies of every document you have about Tyler's medical care, the school incident, and anything else Madison has done. It's time your sister learned what happens when she messes with the wrong family. Grandma, what are you talking about? I'm talking about ending Madison's reign of terror once and for all, Dorothy said grimly. I've been gathering some information of my own about your dear sister, and tomorrow morning we're going to have a very interesting conversation with some people who have been waiting a long time to meet her. Dorothy's mountain cabin felt like a fortress of safety after the nightmare our home had become. Nestled among tall pine trees on 40 acres of private land, it was the kind of place where Madison's surveillance and psychological games couldn't reach us. Tyler had fallen asleep in the cozy loft bedroom, exhausted by the stress of the past weeks, while Brian and I sat with Dorothy around her kitchen table, drinking coffee and finally feeling like we could breathe freely. Dorothy looked older than her 82 years that night, but there was a steel in her gray eyes that reminded me why I had always felt safe with her as a child. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, but she had survived the Great Depression, raised 4 children as a single mother after my grandfather died young, and worked as a surgical nurse for 45 years before retiring. Dorothy was not someone you underestimated. Before I show you what I've discovered about Madison, Dorothy began, I need you to understand something about your father that you've never known. She pulled out a worn photo album and opened it to a page that showed Robert as a young police officer, handsome and confident in his crisp uniform. Your father was a good cop for about the first 10 years of his career, Dorothy said, but power corrupted him, especially after your mother died. He started believing that the rules didn't apply to his family and that his position gave him the right to cover up problems rather than address them properly. She turned the page to show newspaper clippings from the local paper headlines about community service awards and commendations for Robert's police work. But what the newspapers never reported, Dorothy continued, were the complaints that got buried, the excessive force incidents that disappeared from his record, and the way he used his badge to intimidate people who crossed his family. Brian leaned forward. Dorothy, are you saying Robert has been corrupt? I'm saying your father has been using his law enforcement connections to enable Madison's behavior for years, and it's escalated far beyond what you know. Dorothy closed the photo album and pulled out a manila folder that was thick with documents. 3 days ago, I received a phone call from someone I never expected to hear from again. She handed me a handwritten note with a phone number and name Detective Lisa Chen, Family Violence Unit, State Police. Detective Chen called because Madison's name came up in a multi-jurisdictional investigation into family violence cases where local law enforcement failed to properly prosecute obvious crimes. They've been building a case for 2 years. My hands were shaking as I read the note. Grandma, what does this have to do with Tyler? Everything, honey. Because Tyler isn't Madison's first victim and Robert isn't covering up her behavior for the first time. Dorothy opened the folder and spread out several official-looking documents. Madison has been arrested 4 times in 3 different states over the past 8 years. Assault, stalking, harassment, and animal cruelty. Every single case was either dropped or reduced to minor charges because Robert used his connections to interfere with the investigations. The documents were police reports, court filings, and medical records that painted a picture of Madison as a serial predator who targeted vulnerable people, especially children. I read through case after case of incidents that followed the same pattern. Madison would identify someone she perceived as weak or defensible, escalate from psychological harassment to physical violence, and then play the victim when confronted, while Robert used his influence to make the legal consequences disappear. This report is from 2 years ago, Brian said, holding up a thick file. Madison assaulted a 6-year-old boy at a family reunion in Colorado. She pushed him off a playground structure, and he broke his arm in 2 places. The family wanted to press charges, Dorothy explained, but Robert convinced them that it would tear the family apart and that Madison would get the psychological help she needed. Instead, he paid for the boy's medical bills and the family's silence. I found another report describing an incident where Madison had stalked a former co-worker for 6 months, slashing her tires, following her children to school, and leaving dead animals on her doorstep. The woman had obtained a restraining order, but Robert had somehow gotten it dismissed on a technicality. Dorothy. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell me about any of this before? Because I didn't know the full extent of it until Detective Chen called me, Dorothy admitted. Robert made sure these incidents happened far away from our family, and he swore each victim to secrecy. I knew Madison had problems, but I thought they were isolated incidents that she was getting help for. The most disturbing file was labeled Animal Cruelty Investigation, Case 2019-7743. The photos inside showed what Madison had done to a neighbor's cat, and I had to close the folder immediately because I couldn't stomach looking at them. How did Detective Chen get all of this information? Brian asked. Because one of Madison's victims refused to stay silent, Dorothy explained. A woman named Jennifer Walsh finally came forward with evidence that Robert had threatened her family to keep quiet about what Madison did to her daughter. Jennifer Walsh, Tyler's teacher. The woman who had been so understanding and supportive after Tyler's birthday party incident. Mrs. Walsh knows about Madison, I asked. Mrs. Walsh's daughter, Sophia, was Madison's victim 3 years ago. Madison was babysitting for a family friend when she deliberately scalded Sophia with hot water from a bathtub faucet. The little girl was hospitalized for a week with 2nd and 3rd degree burns. I felt like I was going to be sick. Madison had burned another child, and she had gotten away with it because Robert had covered it up. Mrs. Walsh recognized Madison immediately when she saw her at Tyler's birthday party, Dorothy continued. She called Detective Chen that very night to report that Madison was targeting another child. So the police have been watching us. They've been building a case, honey. Every incident with Tyler, every harassment phone call, every attempt to access his medical records. It's all been documented by law enforcement officials who are finally ready to hold Madison accountable for her crimes. Dorothy pulled out one final document, an arrest warrant signed by a federal judge. Detective Chen is coming here tomorrow morning with a team of investigators. They have enough evidence to arrest Madison for multiple felonies, including the assault on Tyler identity theft related to his medical records and conspiracy charges related to the school incident. Brian and I stared at each other in shock. We had felt so alone and helpless, not knowing that law enforcement had actually been building a case to protect Tyler all along. "What about Robert?" I asked. "Your father is facing federal charges for obstruction of justice conspiracy and using his position as a law enforcement officer to interfere with multiple criminal investigations." Dorothy's expression was sad but resolute. "I'm sorry, Annalee, but your father isn't the man you thought he was. He's been enabling a dangerous predator for years, and children have been hurt because of his actions." That night, as I lay in the guest bedroom listening to Tyler's peaceful breathing in the loft above, I felt a complex mixture of relief, anger, and grief. Relief that Tyler would finally be safe from Madison's escalating violence. Anger that so many children had been hurt while Robert covered up Madison's crimes. And grief for the father I thought I had known, who had turned out to be something far darker than I had ever imagined. Tomorrow would bring justice for Tyler and Madison's other victims. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, my son was sleeping peacefully surrounded by people who truly loved and protected him. Detective Lisa Chen arrived at Dorothy's cabin at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, accompanied by 2 other investigators and carrying a large metal briefcase that looked more like something from a spy movie than a police investigation. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of calm confidence that came from years of dealing with dangerous family situations. "Mrs. Thompson." Detective Chen said, shaking my hand firmly, "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I'm glad we finally have the opportunity to protect Tyler properly." Tyler was playing with his toy dinosaurs on the cabin's front porch, close enough that we could see him, but far enough away that he wouldn't overhear our conversation. Brian sat beside me at Dorothy's kitchen table, holding my hand tightly as Detective Chen opened the metal briefcase. "Before we discuss Madison's arrest, I need to explain something about this investigation that might surprise you," Detective Chen began. "Your grandmother has been working with our department for the past 18 months as an unofficial consultant on Madison's case." I looked at Dorothy in shock. "Grandma, you never told me you were working with the police." Dorothy's expression was somewhat sheepish. "I couldn't tell you, honey, because we needed Madison to believe she was operating without scrutiny. If she had known we were building a case, she might have escalated to more dangerous behavior or simply disappeared." Detective Chen pulled out a digital tablet and showed us a map with red dots marking locations across several states. Each of these dots represents a documented incident involving Madison over the past 10 years. We've identified at least 15 victims, including 7 children. The scope of Madison's violence was staggering. She had operated like a predator, moving from state to state and targeting vulnerable people, while Robert used his law enforcement connections to clean up the legal consequences. The breakthrough in our investigation came when Mrs. Walsh contacted us after Tyler's birthday party. Detective Chen continued. She had been too frightened to come forward about her own daughter's assault until she realized Madison was targeting another child. Detective Chen showed us photos from Mrs. Walsh's original police report, including pictures of little Sophia's burns that were remarkably similar to Tyler's injuries. Madison had a specific pattern of using heat and fire to hurt children, apparently finding some sick satisfaction in causing that particular type of pain. "We've been conducting surveillance on Madison for the past 2 weeks, Detective Chen explained. "We have video evidence of her stalking Tyler's school bus, photographing your house, attempting to enter your property, and making fraudulent calls to medical providers." She showed us footage from cameras we had never noticed Madison trying to force open our back gate. Madison searching through our mailbox, Madison attempting to break into Brian's car in our driveway. The level of violation was overwhelming. But the most damning evidence, Detective Chen said, came from Madison herself. She played an audio recording that made my blood turn cold. It was Madison's voice talking to someone on the phone about her plans for Tyler. "The little brat is finally going to learn what happens when you cross me," Madison's voice said clearly. "I'm going to take him somewhere his precious mommy will never find him, and then we'll see how tough he is when he's crying for help." The recording continued with Madison describing detailed plans to kidnap Tyler from school, drug him to keep him quiet, and drive him to a remote location where she could teach him a proper lesson about respecting his elders. "Who was she talking to?" Brian asked, his face pale with horror. "Your father," Detective Chen replied grimly. Robert was not only aware of Madison's plans to kidnap Tyler, he was actively helping her plan the logistics. "The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I couldn't speak. My father had been helping Madison plan to kidnap and harm my son." Dorothy placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Anna Lee, this is why I had to work with Detective Chen. I suspected that Robert was enabling Madison's behavior, but I never imagined he was actively participating in planning crimes against his own grandson." Detective Chen pulled out a thick folder labeled Evidence Conspiracy Charges. Robert used his police database access to research Tyler's daily routines, identify security vulnerabilities at his school, and even map out potential escape routes from your neighborhood. He also provided Madison with financial resources and fake identification documents. Fake identification. Madison has been using multiple false identities to avoid detection when she moves to new areas after committing crimes. Robert helped her obtain fake driver's licenses, social security cards, and birth certificates so she could reinvent herself whenever law enforcement got too close. The metal briefcase contained dozens of fake ID cards with Madison's photo, but different names and addresses. She had been operating as Sarah Mitchell in Colorado when she assaulted the boy at the family reunion as Rebecca Johnson in Florida, when she stalked her former co-worker, and as Michelle Chen in Oregon, when she tortured the neighbor's cat. This is why local law enforcement could never build a comprehensive case against her, Detective Chen explained. Every time she committed a crime, she was using a different identity, and Robert made sure the charges either disappeared or were filed against fake names that couldn't be tracked. I thought about all the times Robert had defended Madison's behavior, claiming she was misunderstood or that people were exaggerating her actions. Now I understood that he wasn't just defending her. He was actively covering up a systematic pattern of violent crimes. "Detective Chen," I said, "what you're describing sounds like organized crime, not just family dysfunction." "You're absolutely correct. Madison and Robert have been operating what amounts to a criminal enterprise specializing in domestic violence and child abuse. Robert uses his law enforcement connections to identify vulnerable families. Madison targets the children or other weak family members, and then Robert ensures that any legal consequences are minimized or eliminated entirely." The true horror of the situation began to sink in. Tyler hadn't been Madison's target because of some family conflict or sibling rivalry. He had been selected as a victim in an ongoing criminal operation that had been hurting children for years. "How many other families are there?" Brian asked. "We've identified at least 12 families where this pattern occurred. In each case, Madison gained access to children through family connections or social situations, escalated from psychological abuse to physical violence, and then Robert used his authority to suppress investigations and silence victims." Dorothy handed me a tissue as tears began streaming down my face. "Honey, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand that none of this was your fault. You couldn't have protected Tyler from something you didn't know existed." Detective Chen closed the briefcase and looked at me seriously. "Mrs. Thompson, in about 2 hours, we're going to arrest Madison and Robert at his house. We have enough evidence to ensure that Madison will spend significant time in prison and Robert will face federal charges that could result in a 20-year sentence. What do you need from us?" "We need Tyler to give a brief statement about what happened at his birthday party and any subsequent incidents he remembers. We also need you to testify about Madison's harassment and the impact it's had on your family." I looked out at Tyler, who was making his toy dinosaurs have an elaborate battle on the porch steps, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. "Will he be safe now?" I asked. "Madison and Robert will never be able to hurt Tyler or any other child again," Detective Chen promised. "And Mrs. Thompson, you've been an incredibly brave mother. Tyler is lucky to have someone who was willing to fight this hard to protect him." As we prepared to drive back down the mountain for Madison's arrest, Dorothy handed me a small wooden baseball bat that had been sitting on her mantelpiece. "This was your grandfather's," she said with a small smile. "He used to say that sometimes you need the right tool for the job. Today our tool is justice." The arrest happened at exactly 11:45 on Saturday morning, and I watched it unfold from Dorothy's car parked at the end of Robert Street. Detective Chen had asked us to be present as witnesses, but far enough away that Tyler wouldn't be traumatized by seeing his grandfather and aunt led away in handcuffs. Robert's house was surrounded by unmarked police vehicles and federal agents. Madison's red Honda was in the driveway next to Robert's pickup truck, which meant they were both inside when the arrest warrant was served. Through binoculars, I could see agents in tactical gear positioning themselves around the property's perimeter. "Mommy, why are all those police cars at Grandpa's house?" Tyler asked from his car seat, pressing his face against the window. "The police need to talk to Grandpa and Aunt Madison about some very serious things they did," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "Remember how we talked about making good choices and bad choices? Well, sometimes adults make bad choices too, and then they have to face consequences." Tyler nodded solemnly. "Like when I broke Mrs. Peterson's flower pot and had to use my allowance to buy her a new one? Exactly like that, honey, but for much more serious bad choices." Detective Chen's voice crackled through the radio she had given us. "Alpha team is at the front door. Beta team is covering the back exit. Beginning arrest procedures now." Through the binoculars, I watched federal agents approach Robert's front door. One agent knocked, while others flanked the entrance, their hands resting on their weapons. The door opened, and I could see Robert's large silhouette filling the doorway. "Robert Thompson, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice conspiracy and violation of federal civil rights statutes," Detective Chen's voice announced over a loudspeaker. "Step outside with your hands visible." Robert emerged from the house slowly, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. Even from our distance, I could see his police officer training kicking in as he complied with the arrest procedures, but his body language screamed outrage and betrayal. Madison appeared in the doorway behind him, and even from 2 blocks away, I could hear her voice, rising in panic and anger. "This is a mistake, Daddy, tell them. This is a mistake. We didn't do anything wrong." "Madison Thompson, you're also under arrest," the loudspeaker announced. "Charges include assault on a minor, stalking, harassment, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." Madison tried to run. She bolted from the front porch and sprinted around the side of the house, heading for the backyard, where she must have thought she could escape through the woods behind Robert's property. But Detective Chen's team had anticipated this possibility, and Madison ran directly into the arms of 2 waiting federal agents. The sound of Madison's screaming carried clearly across the neighborhood as she fought against the agents trying to handcuff her. "You can't do this to me. I'm a victim here. Annalie is the one who's been lying and manipulating everyone." Brian shook his head in disbelief. "Even while being arrested, she's still trying to play the victim." "That's what sociopaths do," Dorothy said grimly. "Madison genuinely believes that she's the injured party in all of this." Detective Chen's voice came through the radio again. "Both suspects are in custody, beginning property search for evidence." Over the next 3 hours, we watched federal agents carry box after box of evidence out of Robert's house. Computers, filing cabinets, photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance equipment. The scope of the investigation was becoming clear. This wasn't just about Madison's assault on Tyler, but about a massive corruption case involving Robert's abuse of his law enforcement position. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Chen's voice called through the radio, "we're ready for you to come to the station for Tyler's statement." The federal building was bustling with activity when we arrived. Madison and Robert were being processed in different areas of the facility, but I could hear Madison's voice echoing through the hallways as she continued to scream about being falsely accused and demanding to speak to her father. Detective Chen led us to a comfortable interview room designed specifically for child witnesses. The walls were painted in soft colors, and there were toys and books scattered around to help young victims feel at ease. Tyler sat between Brian and me, clutching his favorite dinosaur toy as a gentle child psychologist named Dr. Martinez explained what they needed from him. "Tyler, we just need you to tell us the truth about what happened at your birthday party," Dr. Martinez said in a kind voice. "You're not in trouble and you're very safe here." Tyler's account of Madison's assault was clear and consistent. He described how Madison had grabbed his head with both hands and pushed his face down into the lit candles, how the wax had burned his skin, and how Madison had laughed when he screamed. He also told them about Madison taking pictures of him from across the street and about feeling scared when she tried to pick him up from school. "Did your Aunt Madison ever tell you not to tell anyone about what happened?" Dr. Martinez asked. Tyler nodded. "She said that if I told people she hurt me on purpose, it would make Mommy and Daddy very sad, and maybe the police would take me away from them." More manipulation. Madison had been threatening Tyler with family separation to keep him quiet about her assault. While Tyler was giving his statement, Detective Chen showed Brian and me additional evidence they had discovered during the house search. Robert's computer contained detailed files on dozens of families, including surveillance photos, personal information, and what appeared to be target lists of vulnerable children. "Your father was essentially running a predatory operation," Detective Chen explained. "He would identify families with young children, particularly single mothers or families going through difficult times, and then Madison would find ways to gain access to those children. The evidence included photographs of children Madison had never officially met, taken from long distances with telephoto lenses. She had been stalking potential victims for months before making contact, learning their routines, and identifying opportunities to get them alone." "Detective Chen," I said, "how many children are we talking about?" "Based on what we've found so far, we believe Madison physically assaulted at least 12 children over the past 8 years. But the files suggest she was monitoring and planning attacks on dozens more. The systematic nature of Madison's predatory behavior was overwhelming. This wasn't mental illness or family dysfunction. It was calculated criminal enterprise designed to exploit and harm the most vulnerable members of society." "What happens now?" Brian asked. "Madison is being charged with multiple federal crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences. With the evidence we have, she's looking at least 15 years in federal prison. Robert is facing 20 to 25 years for his role in covering up these crimes and using his position as a law enforcement officer to enable them." As we prepared to leave the federal building, Detective Chen handed me a thick folder containing contact information for victim services and family counseling resources. "Mrs. Thompson Tyler is going to need professional help to process what he's been through. And frankly, so are you. It's not easy to learn that people you trusted were capable of such calculated cruelty." Driving home that evening with Tyler safely buckled in his car seat and Madison and Robert locked in federal custody, I finally felt like I could breathe freely for the first time in weeks. But I also knew that our family's healing process was just beginning. The truth about Madison's crimes had been exposed, but we still had to figure out how to rebuild our sense of safety and trust after such a profound betrayal. 2 weeks after Madison and Robert's arrests, Detective Chen called with news that would determine the strength of the federal case against them. Both Madison and Robert had hired expensive defense attorneys who were claiming that the charges were based on circumstantial evidence and that my family was exaggerating Tyler's injuries for financial gain. Mrs. Thompson Madison's attorney is arguing that the birthday party incident was an accident and that everything that happened afterward was simply family conflict blown out of proportion, Detective Chen explained during our phone call. "They're trying to paint Madison as a misunderstood young woman who made a mistake and you as a vindictive sister seeking revenge." I felt my stomach clench with anxiety. But you have all that evidence. The surveillance footage, the fake IDs, the recorded phone calls. We do, and it's strong evidence. But Madison's defense team is very skilled at creating reasonable doubt. They're claiming that Robert was trying to help Madison get psychological treatment, not enabling criminal behavior. They're saying the surveillance was Madison trying to maintain contact with Tyler because she loves him. Brian took the phone from me. "Detective Chen, what do you need from us to make sure these charges stick?" "We need more direct evidence of Madison's intent to harm Tyler and Robert's active participation in planning crimes. The recorded phone conversations are helpful, but Madison's lawyer is claiming they were taken out of context." Dorothy, who had been staying with us since the arrests to help with Tyler's adjustment, leaned forward in her kitchen chair. "Detective Chen, what if we could get Madison and Robert to confess their real intentions on camera? What if they thought they were talking to family members who supported them?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Dorothy, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we arrange a meeting where Madison and Robert think they're getting sympathy and support from me. People often reveal their true intentions when they believe they're talking to allies." Detective Chen's voice became very serious. "That would be extremely dangerous, Mrs. Dorothy. Madison has a documented history of violence, and if she realized she was being recorded, she might become physically aggressive. I'm 82 years old, Detective Chen, but I'm not helpless. And if it means protecting Tyler and putting Madison away for good, I'm willing to take that risk." Over the next few days, Detective Chen worked with federal prosecutors to develop a plan that would be both legally admissible and safe for Dorothy. Madison and Robert were currently out on bail living in a court-approved residence while awaiting trial. They were forbidden from contacting our family, but they were allowed to receive visits from other relatives. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dorothy would call Madison and Robert claiming that she had been wrong to support the police investigation and that she now believed their version of events. She would arrange to meet them at a neutral location, wearing hidden cameras and audio equipment, and encourage them to tell her their side of the story. "The key," Sake Detective Chen explained, "is that Dorothy will present herself as a potential character witness for their defense. People facing serious criminal charges often become overconfident when they think they're gaining support, and they tend to reveal information they should keep private." Dorothy spent hours practicing with the recording equipment, learning how to operate the tiny cameras hidden in her jewelry and the audio devices concealed in her purse. Despite her age, she was remarkably quick to master the technology. "I worked as a surgical nurse for 45 years, she reminded us. "I'm used to operating complex equipment under pressure." Tyler was staying with Brian's sister during these preparations, safely removed from the stress and potential danger of the situation. We had explained to him that Grandma Dorothy was helping the police make sure that Aunt Madison couldn't hurt any other children, and he had accepted this explanation with the resilience that children often show in difficult circumstances. The night before the planned meeting, Dorothy sat me down for a serious conversation about what we might learn from Madison and Robert. "Annalee, honey, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Madison and Robert will say things that are even worse than what we already know," Dorothy warned. "When people think they're talking to sympathetic allies, they often reveal the darkest parts of their thinking." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Madison might tell me things about what she wanted to do to Tyler that are more disturbing than anything we've heard so far. And Robert might admit to covering up crimes that are worse than what the police have already discovered." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Grandma, are you sure you want to do this? What if Madison becomes violent during the meeting?" Dorothy smiled grimly and patted my hand. "Sweetheart, I've dealt with dangerous people before. Madison isn't the first sociopath I've encountered, and she won't be the last. The difference is that this time we have the power to stop her from hurting anyone else." The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon at a small restaurant in a neighboring town, chosen because it was public enough to be safe, but quiet enough for conversation to be clearly recorded. Detective Chen and her team would be positioned throughout the restaurant as customers and staff, ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. As Dorothy prepared to leave for the meeting, she hugged Tyler tightly and whispered something in his ear that made him smile and nod seriously. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that sometimes grandmas have to be very brave to protect the people they love," Dorothy replied, "and I told him that after today he would never have to worry about Aunt Madison again." Watching Dorothy drive away to confront Madison and Robert, I felt a complex mixture of pride, fear, and hope. My 82-year-old grandmother was risking her safety to ensure that Tyler and other children would be protected from Madison's violence. But I also knew that Dorothy was right about one thing. After today, our family would finally know the full truth about Madison's intentions and Robert's complicity. And that truth, however disturbing it might be, would finally allow us to close this chapter and begin healing. The restaurant Dorothy had chosen was a family diner called Mel's Kitchen, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since the 1980s. It was perfect for their purposes, busy enough that hidden surveillance wouldn't be noticed, but quiet enough that conversation would be clearly audible on the recording equipment. Detective Chen had briefed me on the surveillance setup before Dorothy's arrival. 3 agents were positioned as customers at different tables. 2 more were working in the kitchen with the cooperation of the restaurant owner, and Detective Chen herself was operating the sound equipment from a van parked across the street. "We can hear everything clearly." Detective Chen's voice crackled through the radio she had given me to monitor from my car 2 blocks away. "Your grandmother is remarkably calm for someone about to confront 2 dangerous felons." Through the radio, I could hear the ambient sounds of the restaurant clinking dishes, quiet conversation, the hiss of food cooking on the grill. Dorothy had arrived first and chosen a corner booth that would give the cameras optimal angles while making Madison and Robert feel comfortable and private. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard Madison's voice through the radio, artificially sweet and dripping with false emotion. "Grandma Dorothy. Oh, I'm so glad you called. I've been hoping someone in the family would reach out to us. Madison, sweetheart, come sit down." Dorothy replied, her voice warm and grandmotherly. "Robert, you look tired. How are you both holding up?" "It's been hell, Dorothy." Robert's voice was gruff and bitter. "Annalee has destroyed this family with her lies and manipulation. Madison is facing prison time because Annalee convinced everyone that a simple accident was some kind of assault." Madison's voice became tearful and wounded. "Grandma, I never meant to hurt Tyler. It was supposed to be funny like in the movies when people get their faces pushed into birthday cakes. I had no idea those candles would burn him." Dorothy's response was perfectly calibrated to encourage more revelations. "Of course you didn't mean to hurt him, dear. Anyone who knows you can see that you love Tyler. Tell me exactly what happened that day." "Well," Madison began, and I could hear her relaxing into the conversation. "Tyler was being such a little brat about the whole party. He was showing off for his friends and acting like he was so special because it was his birthday. I just thought he needed to be taken down a peg, you know." "Taken down a peg," Dorothy repeated gently. "Kids these days are so spoiled and entitled," Robert interjected. "Tyler needed to learn that the world doesn't revolve around him. Madison was just trying to teach him a little humility." Madison laughed, and the sound was cold and satisfied. "You should have seen his face when I grabbed his head. He was so shocked that anyone would dare to touch the precious little prince. And when he started crying, I thought, good, maybe now he'll appreciate what he has instead of acting like everything is owed to him." Through the radio, I could hear Detective Chen's sharp intake of breath. Madison had just admitted that her assault on Tyler was deliberate and motivated by a desire to humiliate and hurt him. Dorothy pressed further. "But sweetheart, people are saying you planned it, that you knew those candles would burn him." "Of course I knew," Madison said with shocking casualness. "I'm not stupid, Grandma. I picked those candles specifically because they burn hotter and longer than regular ones. I wanted Tyler to remember that lesson for a long time." Robert chuckled approvingly. "That's my girl. Madison has always been smart about getting her point across." "But Robert," Dorothy said carefully, "the police are saying you helped Madison plan other things too. Surely that's not true." "Dorothy, let me tell you something." Robert said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used to use as a police officer. I spent 30 years protecting this community from criminals and troublemakers. When Madison identified problems in our own family, it was my duty to help her address those problems. Problems? Tyler was being raised to be weak and entitled, Robert explained. Annalie was turning him into the kind of boy who grows up to be useless and dependent. Madison and I discussed several interventions that might toughen him up and teach him proper respect for authority. Madison giggled a sound that made my skin crawl. We had such good plans, Grandma. We were going to take Tyler camping for a few weeks, just Madison and him, so he could learn some real-life lessons without Annalie interfering. Camping? Dorothy asked. Well, not exactly camping, Madison admitted. We found this perfect little cabin way up in the mountains where no one would disturb us. Tyler would have learned to appreciate his family and stop taking everything for granted. Robert's voice became dreamy and nostalgic. We had it all worked out. Madison would pick Tyler up from school during one of those fake emergency calls, and we'd drive straight to the cabin. By the time Annalie realized what was happening, we'd be long gone. And what would you have done at this cabin? Dorothy asked, her voice carefully neutral. Madison's response was chilling. Tyler would have learned that actions have consequences. When you disrespect your elders and make false accusations, there are punishments. Real punishments, not the gentle little timeouts that Annalie uses. What kind of punishments? Dorothy pressed. The kind that leave lasting impressions, Robert said ominously. Kids today don't understand discipline because parents are too soft. Madison knows how to make lessons stick. Madison laughed again. Remember when we disciplined that little brat in Colorado, Daddy? He never told anyone what really happened in that playground, did he? Smart boy. Robert agreed. He understood that some lessons are private family business. Through the radio, I could hear Detective Chen coordinating with her team. All units stand by. We're getting extremely incriminating statements. Continue recording. Dorothy's voice remained steady and encouraging. You two have always been so close. It must be wonderful to have that kind of partnership. Madison is my special girl, Robert said with obvious pride. She's the only one in this family who understands that sometimes you have to be strong to get what you want. Annalie was always too soft, just like her mother. I've always known I was Daddy's favorite, Madison agreed. He taught me that people respect strength, not weakness. When Tyler grows up, he'll thank us for teaching him that lesson. If he grows up, Robert said with a dark laugh. The casual way he said those words made my blood turn to ice. Robert was talking about my son's survival as if it were uncertain, as if Tyler's life was something they had control over. Dorothy's voice remained calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. Robert, surely you don't mean that literally. I mean that weak children often don't survive to adulthood, Robert replied. Natural selection, Dorothy. Madison and I were just helping that process along. Madison giggled again. Tyler is so small and fragile. It would be so easy for accidents to happen, especially if he kept making trouble for our family. Through the radio, I heard Detective Chen's voice. That's enough. All units move in. We have more than enough for conviction. The sounds of the arrest were chaotic dishes crashing, Madison screaming, Robert shouting threats and demands to speak to his police union representative. But through it all, I could hear Dorothy's voice calm and steady, giving her statement to Detective Chen. Officers, I want to make it very clear that I cooperated with this investigation voluntarily. Everything Madison and Robert just said was spontaneous and unprompted. They believed they were talking to a sympathetic family member, and they revealed their true intentions without any coercion. As the sounds of Madison and Robert being taken into custody faded, Dorothy's voice came through the radio one final time. Annalie, honey, if you're listening, it's over. Madison and Robert will never hurt Tyler or any other child again. Your grandmother loves you, and Tyler is safe. The evidence gathered from Dorothy's meeting with Madison and Robert was so damning that their defense attorneys immediately began negotiating plea deals. The recordings captured not only detailed confessions about Tyler's assault, but also admissions of planning kidnapping, references to previous assaults on children, and Robert's explicit acknowledgement of using his police authority to cover up crimes. 3 days after the restaurant meeting, Detective Chen called with an update that left me speechless. Mrs. Thompson, Madison's attorney, has informed us that she wants to provide information about additional victims in exchange for a reduced sentence, Detective Chen explained. She's claiming that there are more children who were hurt and that she can help us identify them. More children, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison is apparently willing to provide details about at least 20 other incidents involving children across multiple states. Her attorney says she's kept detailed records of what she calls her teaching moments, and that she can help us contact families who never reported the crimes. I felt sick to my stomach. 20 more children, 20 more families who had suffered what we had gone through, but without the benefit of someone like Dorothy to help them fight back. Detective Chen, why would Madison cooperate now? She's been lying and manipulating since the beginning. Because she's finally realized that she's facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. The federal charges combined with the state charges from multiple jurisdictions could easily result in consecutive sentences that would keep her locked up for the rest of her life. Her only hope for ever getting out is to provide substantial cooperation. Brian took the phone from me. What about Robert? Is he cooperating too? Robert is still maintaining his innocence and claiming that he was just a loving grandfather trying to help his daughter, but his position became untenable when we found his personal files. What personal files? Robert kept detailed records of every crime he helped Madison commit or cover up. Names, dates, amounts of money paid to victims, photographs, even recordings of some of the assaults. We think he was either planning to use the information as blackmail material or he was keeping trophies of Madison's crimes. The systematic documentation of Madison's violence was horrifying, but also crucial for building cases that would bring justice to other families. Robert had unknowingly created a comprehensive record that would help law enforcement identify and contact every one of Madison's victims. Over the next several weeks, Detective Chen kept us informed as the investigation expanded. Madison's cooperation led to the identification of victims in 12 different states, including children who had been assaulted, families who had been stalked and harassed, and at least 3 cases of serious animal cruelty that had been covered up by Robert's police connections. One of the most disturbing discoveries, Detective Chen told us during a meeting at her office, is that Madison had been escalating her violence over time. The early incidents were relatively minor, but each subsequent crime was more serious and more calculated. She showed us a timeline chart that illustrated Madison's pattern of behavior over the past 10 years. It started with psychological harassment and minor physical incidents, but progressed to serious assault stalking and eventually the kidnapping plot involving Tyler. Based on the psychological evaluation we've conducted, our experts believe that if Madison hadn't been arrested when she was Tyler's kidnapping, would likely have resulted in his death. The casual way Detective Chen delivered this information made it even more shocking. Madison hadn't just been planning to scare or hurt Tyler. She had been planning to kill him. Dr. Patricia Valdez, our forensic psychologist, believes that Madison exhibits all the characteristics of a serial predator who was escalating toward lethal violence. Detective Chen continued. Tyler's case represents what she calls the point of no return, where Madison's psychological dysfunction would have resulted in murder. Brian and I sat in stunned silence as Detective Chen explained that Madison's psychological evaluation had revealed a complete lack of empathy, an obsession with power and control over vulnerable people, and a sexual component to her violence against children that made her particularly dangerous. The good news, Detective Chen continued, is that Madison's cooperation has allowed us to build such a comprehensive case that she's agreed to plead guilty to federal charges that will result in a sentence of 25 years to life. She'll be eligible for parole when she's 53 years old, but given the severity of her crimes, it's unlikely she'll ever be released. What about Robert? I asked. Robert's case is more complicated because he's been more resistant to cooperation. However, the evidence against him is overwhelming, and he's facing federal corruption charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences. His attorney has indicated that he may be willing to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of 20 years in federal prison. 20 years seemed like a light sentence for someone who had enabled decades of child abuse, but Detective Chen explained that Robert's age and the likelihood that he wouldn't survive his full sentence made it a practical resolution. The most important outcome, Detective Chen emphasized, is that both Madison and Robert will be permanently removed from society, and Tyler will grow up knowing that his attackers faced real consequences for what they did to him. As we prepared to leave Detective Chen's office, she handed me a letter that had been forwarded through the federal prosecutor's office. This came from Jennifer Walsh, Tyler's teacher, Detective Chen explained. She wanted you to know how Tyler's courage in speaking up helped her daughter and many other children find justice. Mrs. Walsh's letter was handwritten and filled with gratitude and hope. She explained that her daughter Sophia had been struggling with trauma from Madison's assault for 3 years, but that seeing Madison finally face justice had allowed Sophia to begin healing properly. She also mentioned that 12 other families had contacted her after learning about Madison's arrest, all of them grateful that someone had finally stopped Madison's pattern of violence. Tyler may never fully understand how brave he was, Mrs. Walsh wrote, but his willingness to tell the truth saved dozens of other children from experiencing what he went through. You should be incredibly proud of the strong, honest young man you're raising. As we drove home that evening, Tyler asked me why I was crying. I'm crying because I'm proud of you, sweetheart, I told him. You helped catch some bad people who were hurting children, and now those children are safe. Tyler nodded seriously. Mommy, will Aunt Madison ever come to our house again? No, honey, I replied with absolute certainty. Aunt Madison will never be able to hurt you or any other child ever again. For the first time since Tyler's birthday party, I could make that promise knowing it was completely true. The final sentencing hearing took place on a crisp October morning, 6 months after Madison and Robert's arrests. The federal courthouse was packed with victims' families, law enforcement officials, and media representatives who had been following the case since details of the multi-state child abuse conspiracy began emerging. Tyler didn't attend the hearing, but Brian and I were there to deliver victim impact statements and to witness the end of Madison's ability to hurt children. Dorothy sat between us in the front row, looking every inch the formidable woman who had helped bring 2 dangerous criminals to justice. Madison's appearance shocked me. She had lost significant weight during her incarceration, and her once beautiful face looked haggard and hollow. The confident, manipulative woman who had terrorized our family had been replaced by someone who looked small and defeated. She wore a standard orange jail jumpsuit and kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her throughout most of the proceedings. Robert, on the other hand, maintained his defiant posture right to the end. Even in handcuffs and a prison uniform, he carried himself like a man who believed he had been wrongfully accused. When he looked at our family in the gallery, his expression was full of anger and resentment, as if we were the ones who had betrayed him. Federal Judge Margaret Richardson was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being tough but fair in cases involving crimes against children. She had reviewed the extensive evidence against Madison and Robert, including all the recordings, documents, victim statements, and psychological evaluations. This court has rarely seen such a systematic pattern of predatory behavior combined with such extensive corruption of law enforcement processes, Judge Richardson began. The defendants used their positions of trust and authority to identify, target, and harm some of the most vulnerable members of our society. Madison's attorney made a final plea for leniency based on her cooperation with law enforcement and her claimed desire for rehabilitation. He argued that Madison suffered from severe mental illness that diminished her responsibility for her actions. Judge Richardson was unmoved by this argument. While the defendant may indeed suffer from psychological disorders, the evidence clearly shows that her crimes were calculated, premeditated, and carried out with full awareness of their illegal and harmful nature. Judge Richardson stated, Madison Thompson spent years perfecting her methods of identifying and gaining access to child victims. She kept detailed records of her crimes, planned elaborate cover-ups, and showed no remorse until she was facing the possibility of life imprisonment. When it came time for victim impact statements, Jennifer Walsh spoke first, representing not only her daughter, Sophia, but also several other families who had been affected by Madison's crimes. Your Honor, Madison Thompson stole my daughter's childhood innocence and sense of safety in the world. Mrs. Walsh said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. For 3 years, Sophia has struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and fear of people who are supposed to love and protect her. But seeing Madison held accountable has allowed my daughter to begin believing that justice exists and that bad people can't hurt children without facing consequences. When my turn came to speak, I stood at the podium and looked directly at Madison for the first time since her arrest. She refused to meet my eyes. Madison Thompson burned my son's face, planned to kidnap him, and threatened his life, I began. But the real harm she caused was teaching Tyler that family members could be dangerous, that people who claim to love you might actually want to hurt you. Recovery from physical injuries takes weeks or months. Recovery from that kind of betrayal takes much longer. I went on to describe Tyler's nightmares, his anxiety about being separated from Brian and me, and his confusion about why someone he trusted had deliberately hurt him. But I also talked about Tyler's remarkable resilience and his courage in telling the truth, even when adults tried to convince him he was wrong. Tyler survived Madison's abuse, and he helped stop her from hurting other children. I concluded, he deserves to grow up in a world where Madison Thompson can never threaten another child. When Judge Richardson announced Madison's sentence, the courtroom was completely silent. Madison Thompson, you are hereby sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 25 years. You will also serve consecutive sentences totaling 15 additional years for state charges in Colorado, Florida, and Oregon. This court finds that your crimes represent such a serious threat to public safety that society must be protected from you for as long as legally possible. Madison's shoulders shook as the reality of spending most of her remaining life in prison sank in. She would be 63 years old before she could even apply for parole, and with her extensive criminal record, the likelihood of release was minimal. Robert's sentencing was equally severe. Despite his attempts to portray himself as a misguided father, trying to help his daughter, the evidence of his systematic corruption and active participation in planning crimes against children resulted in a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Robert Thompson, you violated your oath as a law enforcement officer and betrayed the public trust in the most fundamental way possible, Judge Richardson stated. You used your authority and access to protect a serial predator and enable crimes against children. This court can conceive of few violations of public duty more serious than yours. At 71 years old, Robert was unlikely to survive his full sentence. He would probably die in federal prison, which seemed like appropriate justice for someone who had spent decades protecting a child predator. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, Detective Chen walked with us to our car. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that this case has had impact far beyond Madison and Robert, she said. The federal investigation exposed corruption in multiple police departments, leading to reforms in how family violence cases are handled. Other law enforcement agencies are now using this case as a training example of how personal relationships can compromise professional judgment. Brian shook Detective Chen's hand. Thank you for believing Tyler and for treating his assault as seriously as it deserved to be treated. Thank you for teaching your son to tell the truth even when adults were trying to convince him he was wrong, Detective Chen replied. Tyler's honesty is what made this whole investigation possible. Driving home from the courthouse, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and hope. relief that Madison and Robert could never hurt Tyler or any other child, sadness for the family relationships that had been destroyed by their crimes, and hope that Tyler could now grow up feeling truly safe and protected. But most of all, I felt proud of my son and grateful for the people like Dorothy Detective Chen and Mrs. Walsh who had helped us fight for justice. Tyler had learned that bad people face consequences, that good people will fight to protect children, and that telling the truth matters even when it's difficult. Those were lessons that would serve him well for the rest of his life. The year following Madison and Robert's sentencing was a journey of healing that taught our family lessons about resilience, trust, and the true meaning of family that no courtroom victory could have provided. Tyler's recovery became the foundation for rebuilding not just his sense of safety, but our entire family's understanding of love and protection. The first breakthrough came 3 months after the sentencing, during a family therapy session with Dr. Patricia Valdez, the same forensic psychologist who had evaluated Madison. Tyler had been reluctant to talk about his experiences with anyone outside our immediate family, but Dr. Valdez had a gentle way of helping children process trauma that made Tyler feel safe enough to share things he had never told us. Tyler, Dr. Valdez said during our 4th session together, "You've been very brave about telling people what happened at your birthday party. Are there other times when Aunt Madison did things that made you feel scared or uncomfortable?" Tyler looked at Brian and me uncertainly, as if asking permission to reveal family secrets. When we both nodded encouragingly, he took a deep breath and began sharing memories that broke our hearts. "Aunt Madison used to pinch me really hard when grown-ups weren't looking," Tyler said quietly. "At Christmas last year, she pinched my arm so hard that I had a bruise for a long time. But when I told Grandpa Robert, he said I was being a tattletale and that I needed to toughen up." Brian's hands clenched into fists as Tyler continued describing incidents we had never known about. Madison had been systematically hurting Tyler during family gatherings for at least 2 years, always when adults were distracted and always with threats to keep him quiet. "She told me that if I ever told Mommy and Daddy about the pinching, she would do something much worse to me," Tyler explained. "She said she knew how to hurt people in ways that didn't leave marks and that she had practiced on other kids." Dr. Valdez took careful notes as Tyler described Madison's pattern of abuse and intimidation. Each incident revealed more about her calculated approach to targeting vulnerable children and her skill at avoiding detection by adults. "Tyler, you are incredibly brave for telling us these things," Dr. Valdez assured him. "And I want you to understand that everything Aunt Madison did to you was wrong and none of it was your fault." But the most shocking revelation came when Tyler described what had happened at Robert's house just 1 week before the birthday party incident. "Aunt Madison showed me pictures on her phone of kids who had gotten in trouble with their families," Tyler said, his voice becoming very small. "She said they were kids who had been disrespectful to their aunts and uncles, and she showed me what happened to them as punishment." My blood turned cold. "Tyler, what kind of pictures?" "Pictures of kids with burns and cuts and bruises," Tyler whispered. "She said that families have to discipline children who don't show proper respect, and that parents sometimes aren't strong enough to teach those lessons." Dr. Valdez leaned forward gently. "Tyler, did these pictures look like they were from a hospital or doctor's office?" Tyler shook his head. "They looked like someone had taken them with a regular camera, and Aunt Madison said she had taken some of them herself to document her teaching moments." Dr. Valdez immediately contacted Detective Chen with this new information. The pictures Tyler described were evidence of additional crimes that hadn't been discovered during the original investigation. Within days, federal agents had tracked down Madison's hidden phone data and recovered hundreds of images documenting her abuse of children across multiple states. "Those photographs will ensure that Madison never gets parole," Detective Chen told us during a follow-up meeting. "They prove that she was documenting her crimes as trophies, which demonstrates the kind of psychological disorder that makes rehabilitation impossible." But Tyler's revelations also had a positive impact on his healing process. Dr. Valdez explained that children who have been systematically abused often carry guilt and confusion about their experiences, especially when the abuse comes from family members they're supposed to trust. By talking about all the things Madison did to him, Tyler is learning to separate normal family relationships from abusive ones, Dr. Valdez explained. He's beginning to understand that real family members don't hurt children and then threaten them to keep quiet about it. As Tyler worked through his trauma in therapy, Brian and I also had to confront our own feelings of guilt and failure. How had we missed the signs of Madison's abuse for so long? How had we failed to protect our son from someone we trusted? Annalie, you can't blame yourself for not recognizing the behavior of a sophisticated predator, Dr. Valdez assured me during one of our sessions. Madison was skilled at manipulating family dynamics and exploiting the trust that normally exists between relatives. Most parents wouldn't suspect that a family member was systematically abusing their child. Dorothy became a crucial part of Tyler's healing process. She spent several afternoons each week with him sharing stories about real family love and teaching him skills that helped him feel strong and confident. Dorothy taught Tyler to cook simple meals, tend a small garden, and even do basic carpentry work with child-safe tools. Tyler needs to learn that he can master skills and solve problems, Dorothy explained to us. Children who have been victimized often feel powerless, but when they develop competencies, they regain their sense of control over their environment. More importantly, Dorothy helped Tyler understand the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually demonstrate love through their actions. Real love protects people, especially children, Dorothy told Tyler during one of their garden sessions. Real love never hurts people on purpose, never threatens them, and never asks them to keep secrets about being hurt. Tyler began to internalize these lessons, and his confidence grew stronger each month. He started sleeping through the night without nightmares. He began participating enthusiastically in school activities again. Most remarkably, he started trusting new adults in his life, like his baseball coach and his music teacher, without the hypervigilance that had characterized his behavior immediately after Madison's arrest. Brian and I also grew stronger as a couple through the experience of protecting Tyler and seeking justice for him. We learned to communicate more openly about our fears and concerns, and we developed a teamwork approach to parenting that made both of us more effective at supporting Tyler's needs. I used to think that good parents could protect their children from all harm, Brian told me one evening as we watched Tyler playing happily in our backyard. Now I know that good parents help their children recover from harm and become stronger because of what they've survived. By the end of that first year, Tyler had developed enough confidence to ask if he could speak to other children who had been hurt by Madison. Detective Chen arranged for Tyler to participate in a peer support group for young victims of family violence, where he met other children who had survived similar experiences. It helps to know that other kids went through what I went through, Tyler told us after his first group meeting, and it makes me feel good to tell them that the bad people got caught and can't hurt anyone anymore. Tyler's participation in the support group became the foundation for understanding that his survival and recovery could help other children heal from their own trauma. He learned that speaking the truth about abuse wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something that protected other potential victims. As we approached the first anniversary of Tyler's 10th birthday, we faced the decision of whether to celebrate the date that had become associated with so much trauma. Tyler surprised us by requesting a birthday party. "I want to have a party because I'm not scared anymore," Tyler announced, "and I want to invite all my friends so they can see that I'm happy and safe." The party we threw for Tyler's 11th birthday was everything his 10th birthday party should have been: joyful, safe, and surrounded by people who genuinely loved and protected him. As I watched Tyler blow out his candles, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated his growth and resilience, I realized that Madison's attempt to destroy his sense of safety had ultimately made him stronger and more aware of what real love looks like. Tyler had not just survived Madison's abuse, he had learned lessons about courage, truth-telling, and family loyalty that would serve him throughout his life. 2 years have passed since that terrible birthday party that changed everything. And as I write this, Tyler is now 12 years old and thriving in ways that fill my heart with gratitude and pride. The little boy who once asked me why someone who loved him would hurt him has grown into a confident young person who understands that real love always protects, never harms. Tyler's physical scars from Madison's assault have faded to barely visible marks on his left cheek, but the emotional strength he developed through surviving that trauma has become one of his most defining characteristics. He speaks openly about his experience to other children who have faced family violence, and his courage in telling the truth has inspired dozens of young survivors to find their own voices. Last month, Tyler received a special recognition award from the State Attorney General's office for his contribution to child protection efforts. The citation read, "For extraordinary courage in speaking truth to power and helping to protect other children from predatory violence." Tyler was proud of the award, but what mattered most to him was knowing that Madison was still in federal prison and would remain there for decades to come. Madison herself has been largely forgotten by our family, which Dr. Valdez tells us is a healthy sign of our collective healing. She exists now only as a cautionary tale that we use to teach Tyler about recognizing dangerous people and trusting his instincts when something feels wrong. We've heard through Detective Chen that Madison has been placed in solitary confinement multiple times for attempting to manipulate other inmates, and guards confirming that prison has not changed her fundamental character. Robert died 8 months ago of a heart attack while serving his sentence in federal prison. Tyler's response to news of his grandfather's death was matter-of-fact rather than emotional. "I'm sorry he chose to help hurt children instead of protect them," Tyler said. "I wish he had been a better person." Dorothy, now 84, continues to be Tyler's most devoted advocate and supporter. She has become involved with victim rights organizations and frequently speaks at law enforcement training sessions about recognizing and responding to family violence. "Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones closest to children," she tells police officers and social workers. "Trust the children when they tell you someone has hurt them." Brian and I have grown stronger as parents and partners through this experience. We've learned that protecting our child sometimes means making difficult decisions that upset other family members, and that our primary loyalty must always be to Tyler's safety and well-being. We've also discovered that surviving trauma together can deepen family bonds in ways that wouldn't have been possible without facing real danger and emerging victorious. The most unexpected development has been my work as a family advocate for other parents dealing with dangerous relatives. Through the victim services organization that supported us during Madison's prosecution, I've helped more than 40 families navigate situations involving family violence and abuse. Many of these families have faced the same challenges we did: law enforcement reluctance to intervene in family matters, pressure from relatives to keep things private, and children who are afraid to speak up about abuse from people they're supposed to trust. The hardest lesson I had to learn. I tell parents who are struggling with these situations is that blood relationship doesn't guarantee love, and love doesn't excuse violence. When someone hurts your child, your job is to protect that child, not to preserve family harmony. Brian has also become involved in community education efforts, speaking to parent groups about recognizing signs of predatory behavior in family members and trusted adults. We all want to believe that people we love are incapable of hurting children, he tells audiences. But predators often use family relationships and community trust to gain access to victims. We have to be willing to believe children when they tell us someone has hurt them. Tyler's school, Lincoln Elementary, has implemented new safety protocols based partly on what happened during Madison's attempt to pick him up without authorization. All staff members now receive annual training about recognizing unauthorized pickup attempts and suspicious behavior from adults claiming family relationships with students. Tyler's situation taught us that we can't assume good intentions from adults who claim to be helping children, Principal Matthews explained during a school board meeting. We have to verify authorization and trust our instincts when something seems wrong. Tyler himself has become remarkably wise about family relationships and personal safety. He can articulate the difference between healthy family dynamics and manipulative or abusive behavior in ways that amaze adults. When new children join his peer support group, Tyler often shares the most important lesson he learned from his experience. Real family members want you to be happy and safe, Tyler tells younger children. If someone in your family makes you feel scared or hurt, or if they tell you to keep secrets about being hurt, that person isn't acting like real family. Real family protects you. Tyler's confidence and emotional intelligence have made him a natural leader among his peers. He's been elected to student council 2 years in a row, plays on the school baseball team, and has maintained excellent grades throughout his recovery process. Most importantly, he's learned to trust appropriate adults and form healthy relationships while maintaining awareness of potential dangers. The life lesson that emerged from our family's nightmare is one that I share with every parent who will listen. Family is not defined by blood relationships or legal obligations, but by the choices people make to love, protect, and support each other. When someone violates those fundamental responsibilities, especially when children are involved, they forfeit their claim to family loyalty. Tyler learned that standing up to dangerous people, even when they're family members, is not just acceptable, but necessary. He discovered that telling the truth about abuse protects other potential victims, and that justice, while sometimes slow, does eventually arrive for those who harm children. Brian and I learned that our primary duty as parents is to our child's safety and well-being, regardless of how that duty affects our relationships with other family members. We discovered that love sometimes requires difficult choices, and that protecting children from predators is always more important than maintaining family harmony. Dorothy taught all of us that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes grandmothers with hidden cameras can be more effective than police officers with badges. She showed us that justice requires patience planning and the willingness to take calculated risks to protect innocent people. As I watched Tyler playing in our backyard this afternoon, laughing with friends and showing no signs of fear or anxiety, I am overwhelmed with gratitude for the people who helped us fight for his safety and justice. Mrs. Walsh, who recognized Madison's danger and contacted law enforcement. Detective Chen, who believed Tyler's story and built a case that protected other children. Dr. Valdez, who helped Tyler process his trauma and emerge stronger. And Dorothy, whose courage and wisdom guided us through the darkest period of our lives. But mostly, I am proud of Tyler himself, who survived deliberate cruelty from people who claimed to love him and emerged with his kindness, honesty, and trust intact. He has learned that bad people face consequences, that good people will fight to protect children, and that telling the truth matters even when it's difficult and scary. Tyler's story is ultimately one of triumph over evil, but more than that, it's a testament to the power of real family love to heal trauma and restore hope. We discovered that family isn't just about the people you're related to, but about the people who choose to love and protect you when you need them most. I hope that anyone facing a similar situation will remember Tyler's courage and know that children deserve to be believed when they report abuse, that family relationships don't excuse violence, and that justice is possible when good people refuse to accept that children should suffer in silence. Has your family ever faced a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and protecting a child? How did you handle the pressure to keep things private when someone you loved was being hurt? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about families who overcame impossible challenges through courage and love. Share this story with anyone who might need to hear Tyler's message that children deserve to be believed and protected. Thank you for listening to our family's journey from trauma to healing. Remember that real love always protects, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up to dangerous people, even when they're family. Tyler's courage saved not just himself, but dozens of other children who might have become Madison's victims. That's the kind of legacy that makes surviving trauma worthwhile. Stay strong, protect the children in your life, and never forget that justice is possible when good people refuse to stay silent.